Now that you've mixed your paint to the proper consistency on the palette paper, I'm going to demonstrate how to create hard edge painting. This applies to design, again, that are specific shapes like this. It also applies to paintings because there's always a lot of flat shapes that are very abstract in nature but have very clean edges. In painting class, I always say it's a combination of blending and hard edge. We don't do blending usually in a design class, but there is one project that calls for it, but mostly it's flat, hard edge shapes. And consistency applies to every kind of acrylic or oil paint. The key at this point is to manipulate the flat brush. So you want to have a variety of flat brushes and bright. When they're short squares, those are bright. When they're long rectangles, they're flat. That one's a filbert because it's rounded on the top. I don't want that. You only want to use flat brushes. Even if you use a baby one, it shouldn't be a round brush. It should be flat. I won't be using that, of course, because that's more for details on a painting or a design. But I'm not probably going to use this one either. It's too small. We want to use brushes that fit the area. This is ideal, especially in a watercolor, because you want to do it in one hit. But in this class, I might do a little bit of that brush. So I'm going to keep these out. And the next step will be transferring the paint to the brush. And that's going to be a little tricky to show because I just set this up, but basically you want to take this brush, see if I can do it like this, yeah, and swirl it significantly into the paint pile, spin it, swirl it, and get paint on there. You want to actually see, that could drip right off. That's what you want. You can even do this with a palette knife. So when I'm applying paint, look how I'm just getting it on there. It's better to overdo the amount of paint because we're just going to move it. We're going to move it to the side, and the brush acts as a scoop to get it back up. You can even use your finger. But see how generous I was with that? I didn't go watery, I didn't go dry. I placed it, and then I'm going to move it throughout the shape. Now this is the tape off, so it's easier. See how I'm pulling the paint off the sides and scooping up the excess. Then I'm spinning my brush over here to get the excess off so that I can come back and scoop up this extra that's here or anything I want to fix on there. A lot of times we do crisscross, and when I do crisscross, I'm doing super light now, holding my brush so loose that it's like a feather. So it's the opposite of just what I did. I used a big blob to get it on there, and then I nuance it so that I don't have a lot of texture. If I'm not happy with that kind of a brush, if the brush is not soft enough, I can get another one. See now, see how it picked up a little paint? That means I got to go back up, get some more on there. See, I can even do it with a palette knife. Get it on there. It would be like icing a cake with tiny little layers. You're not going to do it that way. Great thing about acrylic is 5 minutes from now I can go over it and do another layer. Each layer is thin. Even though I blobbed it on to get it on there, I'm not just leaving it a blob. I'm pulling the blob off. I think that's the problem people have when I say do better consistency. They just blob on more and think that's the layer. Problem with that is you get these thick textural areas. You're not getting a soft, nuanced moving of even areas of paint. You can go in a certain direction, you can crisscross, but that's a layer. I would leave this for, 15, 20 minutes and then come back later and do it again. So the taping method's for the easy, because once it's taped, the taping is the hard part. But once you pull this on and get a thin coat, it's not a thin coat because it's a nice consistency, but it's not a big blob left there. The blob is just the starting point, and then slowly pull it off the edge. And that's a layer. Sometimes people feel like it just keeps getting darker and darker because it does dry darker. And if that's the case, always err on the side of light, whether it's gray or add white to your hue or whatever you need to do. I'm not even going to use this brush. It's too small. This brush actually is perfect. The bigger the brush, the better the blend. The bigger the brush, the better the paint consistency. So at this point, I'm going to mix again. I don't want to get lazy and use the same pile. You got to keep at it. You got to keep checking your pile because piles are going to get dry and you're going to lose that lush, buttery look that we want. Same thing, saturate my brush. Take a look at how much paint is on there. Big blob. I'll put more so you can see. See that? It could practically fall off, but not watery. Big blob. Now this side's going to be trickier because this is called hard edge painting, the real kind. Not that shape isn't real, but it's good for effect, but it's not good for training as an artist because then you're not training your hand and your eye to do this and learning the brush. But it's a backup if you're really struggling. It's kind of like a grid. You want to use a grid when you're struggling with learning how to draw, but you don't want to use a grid when you actually have learned proportions, measuring, eye level, ellipsis, symmetry, structure, perspective, all that kind of stuff. At that point, you want to always trust your eye and not rely on a framework. But we always start with a grid because it's the beginning of learning a composition, and it keeps things together, especially in an online setting where the teacher can't sit in your chair. In a classroom, I'd tell you to stand up if we're looking on a still life, and I'd sit in your chair and try to crouch so that my torso and eye level, everything lined up with yours. And then I would see what you see, study what you're looking at, make corrections, and then stand up, you sit back down, and then you see what I just saw from your vantage. It's a trained eye versus a learning eye. That's what it's all about. And so then you can start to see corrections in drawings. But for now, grids are okay, and for now, tape is okay. But this is what we want to try to get to, because the more you practice, the better. So you got this blob. Now, hard edge painting is not about putting a small amount either. It's moving this pile and using a flat brush that gets this kind of an edge. There's 3 ways to use a flat brush. See, it's got a little texture on the, it's not too bad. One way is to go to the edge. Now you got to hold your breath when you get there. So I can't talk. So that's one way. I'm going to use another brush size just so you can see the point of this flat brush thing. Okay? You've got your pile here, so you don't have to keep dipping. So this is one way. You start at the edge. See, I didn't hold my breath, but take your finger when that happens. Call that the puffy line, or if you go outside the bounds, push it back in quickly. If you are going this way and you're pressing too hard, you're going to get a puffy line. It basically means it's a thick textural line. So you have the pull back here, and then this is the second use of a flat brush. Notice how slow I'm going, and notice how I hold my breath, and notice how I really, really, really go slow. That's the key. You don't want to go fast. But see, I made a puffy line. Now I got to the edge, but I made a puffy line. Hope you can see that. Let me see if I can do this and get it back. Okay, right there. There it goes. See it? I'll try to point to it. It's important to see. Okay. See this right on the edge? That's called a puffy line. problem with that is, even though I got to the edge, right there, see, I got to the edge, so it looks good from here, but now I have this thing I have to deal with. So guess what I do? This is what you want to do. Place your finger here,